A couple of months ago, Mandy woke up and there was this pretty significant pain in the back of her leg. And it was kind of mysterious because she had absolutely no idea what she'd done to her leg. In fact, she hadn't really done anything to it, but yet there was still this pretty significant pain there. And what was really unusual about this is that when I woke up that morning, I had a pretty significant pain in my big toe. And it was the kind of feeling that you have when you stub your toe real hard. And so, putting two and two together, Mandy has this mysterious pain in her leg, and I have this mysterious pain in my toe. Sure enough, we get up, and there's a bruise in exactly the shape of my big toe on the back of her leg, which is causing her this pain. And apparently I kicked pretty hard at myself. So that was the situation a couple of months ago. And then on Friday morning, just a couple of mornings ago, I woke up and I've got that exact same pain in my toe, only this time it's about twice as bad. And so the first thing I do when I notice that I have this pain is I look over to see if there's a bruise on Mandy. And so this time there's no bruise. Obviously I did something in my sleep. I kicked the mattress. I don't know. This story has absolutely nothing to do with the sermon today. I'm telling it to you because several of you have asked me, hey, did you hurt yourself? I see you're walking with a little bit of a limp. So I appreciate the concern. I appreciate you asking. But no, I just kicked the mattress in my sleep. I'll be fine. It'll be all right. Mandy's fine too. So that story doesn't have anything to do with the message today, but today's message is about friendship, and there is a story from Scripture that demonstrates a very powerful friendship, and that is the friendship between Jonathan and David. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the friendship between Jonathan and David, because in a lot of ways it is the quintessential story of friendship in the Bible. And just to give you a little bit of a reminder, Jonathan was, of course, the son of King Saul. And Saul was the first king of Israel. And Jonathan, being, Saul's son, of course, grew up in the king's court. David also spent his teenage years growing up in the courts of King Saul, and so they had a close proximity to each other. They likely saw each other every single day. And these two young men also had an awful lot in common, which explains why they formed such a strong bond and had such a compelling friendship. One of the first stories that we hear about Jonathan comes in 1 Samuel chapter 13, and it's a really cool story. Jonathan is leading a garrison of Saul's men against the Philistines, and they come up to this particularly treacherous stretch of land where it's pretty obvious that a trap is being set for them, because up ahead they can see a ravine that goes between two canyons, and they're pretty sure that the Philistines are camped out at the top of one of those cliffs, which means that if they go through the ravine, what's going to happen? Right, they're going to get demolished. They're going to get destroyed. And so Jonathan and his garrison hang back, and that night, Jonathan just gets this wild hair. Like he just has this idea. He says, you know what? He goes to his armor bearer and he says, you know what? I think me and you should go confront those Philistines all by ourselves. Just me and you, right? And so then he gets a little bit more specific with the plan. He says, okay, wait a second. So we need to make sure this thing is of God. This idea is of God. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk right up just to where the Philistines can see us, because at this point, the Philistines have not yet seen the Israelites. So Jonathan and his armor bearer, they're going to walk up just to where the Philistines can see them. And so the idea is that once the Philistines see them, the Philistines will either say, hey, you, wait there, we're coming down to you, which would of course put the Israelite soldiers in a much better defensive position to defeat the Philistines, or the Philistines will say, hey, you, come on up here. In which case, Jonathan's plan is for him and his armor bearer to defeat all of those Philistines by themselves. And so, of course, the latter happens. Jonathan and his armor bearer walk up to where the Philistines can see them, and the Philistines say, hey, you, come on up here. So Jonathan climbs up the cliff with his armor bearer following him, and when they get to the top of the cliff, he and his armor bearer defeat 20 Philistines, right? All by themselves. I don't know what kind of ninjutsu they are teaching to the soldiers of Israel at this point, but obviously Jonathan is a great warrior. And so Jonathan and his armor bearer kick the tails of these 20 Philistines. And the text says that this entire fight is taking place within the space of about half an acre. Which is simply to say it's kind of close quarters there. And when the rest of the Philistines get word of what's going on, they become terrified that it only took these 2 Israelites to defeat 20 Philistines. And so the rest of the Philistines, they're like, okay, well, if these 2 can defeat us, what could this whole garrison do? So they take off and start running. And Saul's army moves in, and then a great victory is won. And, this story is not all that different from a story in the life of David, which is, of course, the story of David and Goliath. And in the story of David and Goliath, and in this story with Jonathan, one of the things that we learn about these 2 men is that, first of all, both of them are great warriors. Neither of them lack confidence in their own ability, but also, more importantly, neither of them lack confidence in God's ability. Their confidence and trust in God is so great that if they sense that God is calling them into an impossible situation, they're going to go anyway because their trust in God is that great. And so it becomes very clear how these 2 great men would also become great friends, because that's how most of our friendships work, isn't it? We find a person with whom we have a lot in common, and we start building a relationship around those things that we have in common. But, it wasn't all good times for Jonathan and David. There were some very significant barriers in their friendship, barriers that a lot of us would not have to deal with, although all of our friendships have times when they are tested. The test was especially severe and strong for the friendship between Jonathan and David, because remember, Jonathan is the son of King Saul. And so, according to the traditions of the day, according to everyone's expectations, the next in line to be king should be Jonathan, right? And except that's not what's happening in Israel. Saul has disappointed God, and so God has directed Samuel to anoint David as the next king of Israel. And so it would be easy for us to understand if Jonathan hadn't been too excited about that situation. I think the normal expectation would be for Jonathan to probably have a big problem with this scenario, except we're told that he doesn't. And I think a lot of that has to do with not only his respect for David and his belief that David will be a great king, but also his trust in God. Jonathan trusts Samuel, Jonathan trusts God, and so it does not seem to bother Jonathan that God has chosen David and not him to be the next king. But it does bother Saul. Saul is not okay with the situation, and so he seeks to take matters into his own hands and tries over and over and over again to have David killed. Now, the expectation, I think not just of that time, but of most time, was that, in a situation like this, I think we'd expect, a prince to take the side of his father, the king. But that is not what happens here. We have very clear evidence that Jonathan loved his father. When David informed Jonathan that Saul was trying to kill him, his first instinct was to think that David must be mistaken. My dad wouldn't do that. I love my dad. My dad's a good man. He would not do this to you. But then, of course, Jonathan discovers that David is correct. And so knowing that his father is in the wrong, he helps David escape. And you may remember the story. Jonathan and David, when they're having this discussion, Jonathan tells David, he says, "Okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to find out where my father's heart really is on this situation. And if it is true that he wants to kill you, then this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a signal, and the signal is going to be that I'm going to take my bow and arrow. I'm going to take my servant. We're going to go out to the field." And I'm going to shoot the arrow beyond where you're hiding out. And if I shoot the arrow beyond where you're hiding out, you know that it's not safe and that you need to leave. And so that's exactly what happens. Jonathan confirms that Saul does indeed want to kill David. And so he and his servant go out there. He pulls the arrow. It goes beyond David, and David knows that his life is in danger. And so he begins his journey away from Saul during that time. And the last time that Jonathan and David meet, it's a very touching picture. First of all, it's too that these guys cared about each other a lot. Their friendship was very important to one another. You can tell that this friendship had made each of them better. And at the last time they meet, Jonathan expresses his supreme confidence that David's going to make a great king, and David assures Jonathan that Jonathan and his line would be safe in David's kingdom. This is a very compelling story of two very good friends. And you know, friendship, in a lot of ways, is an undervalued kind of relationship. You know, we all place a very high value on the relationship that husbands and wives have with each other. We all place a very high we all place a very high value on the relationship between parents and their children. We place a very high value on the relationships that brothers and sisters have between one another. But I think especially in this day and age, we don't value friendship as much as we should. And the reality is that friendships are so important because good friends make us better people. Good friends make us better people. You know, there are some things that I can learn about life from my parents, just, you know, passing their wisdom on to me, passing the wisdom of their own experiences on to me. And if I am faithful to listen and to take that advice seriously, it can help me to grow and it can help me to avoid a lot of mistakes. And that's a very important kind of a relationship to have. But as valuable as that is, it's one thing to receive that wisdom from a generation older than myself, where they're simply telling me about that experience that they had in the past. But it's an entirely different thing to see that wisdom play out in the life of your friend. You know, I have a friend who, you know, he and his wife got married when they were 19 years old, and everybody told them that they were, you know, that they didn't know what they were doing and they were too young. And I probably told them that at one point or another. But they have had a long and successful marriage. In fact, they have one of the strongest marriages that I've ever been around. And I've actually learned a lot, as much as I've learned from watching my parents and hearing about their stories of marriage. You know, I've seen my friend's marriage play itself out in real time, right? And that's a completely different kind of wisdom to receive. Not only that, it wasn't too long ago that I was single, and I had other single friends, And sometimes the reverse of that is true. I had single friends who were living their lives in a way that they probably should not have been living their lives, and seeing their mistakes and the consequences they suffered from that, it helped me to do better. It helped me to do better and to learn. And so good friends make us better. And I don't think in our culture we value our friendships as much as we should. I think a lot of us, we value our family relationships. But how much time do we invest in deepening the friendships outside of our family, our friendships with our peers, because we can learn so much from them and they can learn so much from us. Friendship, in a lot of ways, is a lost art. And it's, there's a number of reasons for this. In fact, I've heard some people say that one of the reasons why friendship is a lost art is because of the invention of air conditioning. It used to be that, especially in Houston, in the evenings, if you wanted to get cool, you didn't have air conditioning in your home, so you went out and you hung out on your front porch, and all of your neighbors were hanging out on their front porches, and so it was just simply more natural for us to develop those friendships with our neighbors. There's a number of reasons why friendship has become a lost art, and we're going to talk about a few of those today, because it's not just about air conditioning. There's some other things that are at work here, but it's so important for us to reclaim our ability to make and deepen our friendships, because it's not just important for our personal growth, it's also important for the growth of our church. It's important for the growth of the kingdom of God. Because it isn't just a deficiency of friendships that we are experiencing. Our culture is experiencing a deficiency of fellowship and community. We're experiencing our capacity for friendship, our capacity for fellowship has diminished in this culture. Fellowship, friendship, I believe, is something that used to come a little more naturally than it does to us today. We are engaged in an effort to revitalize our small groups ministry in this church. And, small groups ministry, we've always called it Sunday school. We still call it Sunday school in our church. But when you go back into the history of Sunday school ministries, the number one concern of a Sunday school ministry has always been to teach the Bible. And it still is, and it still should be. The number one concern of a Sunday school or small group ministry should be instruction in the Word of God, growing in the Word of God. However, just because that is the number one concern of a small groups or Sunday school ministry doesn't mean that it's the only concern. Sunday schools developed because the church saw that there was a deficiency in our culture when it came to people knowing and understanding the Word of God. And so Sunday school became a tool to attach that. That deficiency obviously still exists in our culture, but we have become deficient in another area as well. We are deficient when it comes to fellowship. We just aren't as good as the people who came before us in having simple human personal relationships with one another. And so there are a number of reasons why that is the case. But we're going to talk about just a few of them today. We're going to begin by talking about some of the factors that inhibit our ability to not only make our friendships and fellowship deeper, but also inhibit us from making new friends. Making friends is something that we teach our kids, but I think it's something that we need a reminder of from time to time. So we're going to start with one of the big ones. One of the big factors that inhibits our ability to make new friends is prejudice. Now, prejudice in our culture it's kind of a dirty word, right? because prejudice is often a dirty thing. It's not something we want to be associated with. In fact, if somebody asks you, are you prejudiced? Your typical response is to be no. No, of course I'm not prejudiced. And the reality is, in some fashion or another, we are all prejudiced. We all have our prejudices. For some of us, we have prejudice when it comes to race. For some of us, we have prejudice when it comes to levels of education. For some people, we have prejudice when it comes to a person's gender. For some of us, we have prejudices when it comes to the way a person dresses, the way a person's... There are all different reasons, all different kinds of prejudice. And so you may very well not be a racist, but we all struggle with prejudice from time to time. And the reason for that is very simple. There is one useful purpose that prejudice serves, and it's connected to our fight or flight mechanism. When we see someone who looks out of place in our environment, we are programmed to just simply be on guard until we've established that this person is not that's kind of ingrained into our DNA. It was especially useful to human beings before civilization, when we lived in tribes and we were concerned about warring and all of that kind of stuff. The problem with this is that more often than not, we are satisfied to just sort of become comfortable with our prejudice and to let it sit there in us and not to go past that to get beyond the prejudice to see, is this a person that I need to be friends with? So let's just take a look at one example of prejudice. We've got a picture here. For those of you who may not be able to see, this is it's a blue collar worker. He's a welder. He's got his work clothes on. He's dirty from a hard day's work. When you see a picture of a guy like this, there are certain judgments that you are making about him in your mind. There's certain things that you assume about him. You might assume that this is a guy who works hard for what he has. You may assume that he didn't go to college. Now, you may or may not be right, but that's what a lot of you are assuming when you see a picture like this. Your assumptions just start coming out. You're not even choosing those assumptions. It's just impressions that you get from this image. Now, let's show another picture. Okay? So now we've got this picture over here with a guy with his hair neatly combed, obviously a freshly pressed shirt, a tie, expensive clothes. You're going to make a whole different set of assumptions about this guy right here than you are about this other guy. Now, both of these guys are white, and so your assumptions and your prejudice may not have anything to do with race, but you've still got them. For some of you, you look at these two pictures and you think to yourself, you know what, I think I'd be more likely to be friends with this guy. I think this is a guy I'd like to hang out with. For some of you, you think, you know what, this guy is probably a little bit more like me and my culture, and I'd probably be a little bit more comfortable hanging around this guy. And that is the way prejudice works. And it works, it's at work all of the time. And not only can this kind of prejudice keep us from getting beyond the surface level in our relationships with people, but it can keep us from even walking across the room in the first place to introduce ourselves to that person, to even attempt to be their friend. And the reason for that is because we have this assumption that all friendships, just like Jonathan and David's, should begin with something that we have in common. And the reason we think that is because that's the easiest way to begin a friendship. The easiest way to begin a friendship is when you establish that you've got something in common with somebody. But here's the thing. You will find that some of the richest and the most important and impactful relationships that you will ever have in your life are going to be with someone who you had to work through a prejudice. You had to work through an assumption that you and the other person were different before you got to the things that you have in common. I had one of the most important friendships that I've had in my life is with a Vietnamese American named Phu. Now, he has been in the States for most of his life. He's been in Houston for most of his life, but he was born in Vietnam, and his parents escaped from the communists when he was just a kid, and so he was raised mostly in the United States. But he still has maintained his Vietnamese accent. Growing up with parents who spoke Vietnamese as their first language, he maintained that Vietnamese accent. And so when I first met Phu about 17 years ago, the context was I was beginning an internship at a church, and Phu was set up to be my mentor. And I saw that his name was Phu Lu. I knew that he would be Vietnamese American. And so, I didn't have any problems with that whatsoever. I didn't make any assumptions based on that. But for some reason, and I still don't understand it to this day, for some reason, when he spoke and I heard that he still had that Vietnamese accent, there was this very quiet assumption that I made. And I remember assuming, this guy and I are probably not going to hit it off. Like I didn't have any problem with him. I didn't think I was better than him in any way. But I had this quiet assumption that even though I might be able to learn a lot from him and it might be a good internship, I just had this quiet assumption that he and I are probably not going to have it. And it was just based on that difference in the way he pronounced certain words. That's the subtle way in which prejudice affects us and impacts us. And now I was quickly able to move past that because I was quickly able to see all of the other things that Phu and I did have in common. And this went on to be one of the richest friendships of my entire life. Because of Phu's differences from me, I learned a lot of things that I would never have learned. Because of his, kind of harrowing backstory, there are, escaping from Vietnam, there are things that he understands about the grace of God and what it means to be saved by Jesus Christ that I would never be able to understand just from my experience. It was the differences between Phu and I and overcoming those differences that made our friendship that much richer. But for most of us, our prejudice remains a barrier, and it keeps us from even walking across the room because maybe a person is dressed a little bit differently or has a different hairstyle from the kind of person we normally have our friendships with. Maybe the person is a little older than the kind of person we like to have our friendships with. Maybe the person is a little younger than the kind of person we have our friendships with. But the reality is, if we limit our friendships just to people who are like us, we're going to continue to experience a deficiency in fellowship, a deficiency in friendship, because some of the most important and rich friendships of your life will be with people who are different from you. And you're going to learn things that you never could have learned from someone who is more like you. So prejudice is a big one. A next friendship inhibitor is our own personal insecurity. And our own personal insecurity is, it's tricky because not only can it keep us from making new friends, but it can also keep us from taking our existing friendships to a different level. It's obvious how our own personal insecurity could keep us from making new friends, because if you are personally insecure, you're afraid of rejection from somebody you don't know. But it also makes you less likely to be vulnerable with your existing friends. And in order for your friendships to go deeper, at some point in your life, you're going to have to be vulnerable with your friends. You're going to have to share with them when you're going through a time of hurt or pain. You're going to have to share with them that you need them, right? And if we can't be vulnerable with our friends, if our insecurities prevent us from doing that, then we're missing out on a lot that friendship has in store for us. And I do want to distinguish here. There's a big difference between being insecure and being an introvert. Those two things are really not related. You can be an introvert and still be very self-assured. You can be an introvert and still be very confident. Introvert versus extrovert, that's the difference between where you get your energy from. If being around a big group of people drains you, then you are an introvert. Now, you may feel perfectly confident in that group of people. You may feel perfectly fine going around and talking to everyone. You may have great conversations. You may not feel insecure about that at all. It just takes a lot out of you. On the other hand, you can be an extrovert and be very insecure in yourself. Robin Williams is a good example of a person who is an extrovert, the life of the party, right? But a big part of the reason for the life of the party is that why he was the life of the party is that he was compensating for his own personal insecurities. Now here's the thing about a barrier like our own personal insecurity. And honestly, it's the same true for a barrier like prejudice. It takes a lot of work to overcome your insecurity. It takes a lot of intentional work to overcome it. It takes a lot of work to overcome prejudice, right? In fact, on some level, especially with a thing like prejudice, you're probably never going to totally overcome that in your life. But what you can do is you can be aware of it. You can be aware when your own prejudice is creeping in. You can be aware when you are failing to take a friendship deeper because of your own personal insecurity. And if you are aware of that, you can choose to make a different decision. Now, I don't want to spend the rest of our time today talking about how to overcome our prejudice and how to overcome our personal insecurities, because frankly, we couldn't do that in 12 sermons, right? It requires a lot of work, a lot of time and effort. But we can talk about how to overcome those things for the sake of developing better friendships. But before we do that, I want to talk about one more thing. And this doesn't complete the list of the things that inhibit friendships for us, but I think it's probably the most pervasive factor at work in our culture, and that is distraction. There is nothing that inhibits fellowship. There is nothing that inhibits our development of stronger personal relationships like distraction in our culture. And the reality is that I've got a distraction attached to me just about 24 hours a day. Because if it's not in my pocket, it's always within arm's reach, even when I sleep at night, because I depend on it either for the white noise or for the alarm clock. This distraction is attached to me all of the time. And distraction is not a new problem, but our access to distraction is on overdrive right now. Back in 1985, Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And, in 1985, the big cultural distraction, and it had been for some time already, was television, right? So now we have, but televisions used to be stationary, right? You had to go home to watch television at least. Well, now we carry a television and a computer and a phone around in our pocket all of the time. And so our culture of distraction is on absolute overdrive, and we are going to burn out if we do not do something intentional about getting this distraction under control. Because here's the danger of distraction. Being alone with your thoughts can be an uncomfortable position to be in. Because there's some different things that can happen when we are alone with our thoughts. When we are alone with our thoughts, we can start to think about all of the things that we have to do on our to-do list. We can think about all of the unfinished business we have, and we can become very stressed out. Or we can think about all of the ways in which we've failed as a parent. And we can think about all of the ways in which we've failed as a friend or as a spouse. And and all of a sudden guilt and shame begins to creep up within us. Or during those quiet times of quiet thinking, maybe the thoughts that creep up at that time are the memories of a time when someone hurt us. And every time we think about that, we're reliving that hurt over and over and over again. Those times of quiet thought can be uncomfortable. We don't like them. But lucky for us, we have this constant, reliable source of distraction that we can just turn to and not have to think about the hard stuff. Not have to think about the stressful stuff. Not have to think about the stuff that hurt us. You know, the healthy thing to do with those uncomfortable thoughts is to turn to the person you're sitting next to and engage in a relationship with them and process some of those thoughts and talk through some of those things until they aren't so stressful for you anymore, until they aren't so hurtful for you anymore. But we have diminished our capacity for fellowship. We have diminished our capacity for personal relationships because this is so much easier. It's so much easier. And maybe this isn't your distraction. Maybe you don't like the phone. We all have our distractions, though, and we have to be aware of them. And once again, you know, just like we can't tackle how to completely overcome our prejudices in one sermon. We can't tackle how to completely overcome our insecurities in one sermon. I mean, this pervasive distraction, it's in our culture to stay, folks. And we can't talk about how to overcome this distraction all in one sermon. But here's something that we can do to overcome all of these relationship inhibitors and just do a better job. We can be intentional. That's it. We can be intentional. If I see a new person in this room and I feel that prejudice pop up, I can be aware of the prejudice, but I can know that the right thing to do is to walk over to that person, say hello to them, establish that relationship with them, and be intentional about it. If there's a person in my Sunday school class who is going through a tough time, you know, they're going through their tough time over here, but hey, I'm going through my tough time too. You know, I've got these personal insecurities that I'm struggling with. I may not be able to overcome that just like this, but I can be intentional. I can know, you know what? This person needs me right now. So I'm going to, in this moment, I'm going to overcome my personal insecurity. And I'm going to go to them and I'm going to say, hey, can I pray with you? Hey, can we have coffee together so you can talk some of this out with me and get some of this off of your chest? In that moment, if I'm intentional, I may not overcome all of my insecurity, but in that moment, I have. This distraction thing, man, it can be pretty difficult because it is there with us all of the time. And being intentional about getting rid of the distraction, it's going to be a constant struggle. You know, it's about making the conscious choice to put your phone down and to have a conversation with the person sitting next to you. Or it could be a conscious decision to put the phone down and pick up a book, right? Or a conscious decision to put the phone down and instead of just spending an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours on a distraction, spend that time on something that is nourishing you spiritually. You know, there's no easy answer to these friendship inhibitors. It's not easy, but it's simple. Be intentional. Be aware of the barrier that's standing in your way. Be aware of that prejudice. Be aware of that insecurity. Be aware of that distraction. And then, in the moment, make the right choice. In the moment, make the right choice. And the more you make the right choice, the easier it's going to be to make that right choice the next time. Because there is a payoff. Deep, meaningful friendship is better than prejudice. Deep, meaningful friendship is better than insecurity. Deep, meaningful friendship is better than anything your personal distraction has to offer you. It is. It just is. And it brings me back to what we read this morning in Psalm 133. How pleasing it is to the Lord when brothers and sisters live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down upon the collar of his robes. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. Even life forevermore. David's saying that there is eternal value in our friendships. Where friendship exists, there the Lord bestows his blessing. And it doesn't take much to understand how true this is. I want you to think about the people in your life who bring you the most joy. The people who bring you the most joy, either because every time you talk to them, they make you laugh or they make you smile. Every time you're around that person, you just have a better day. Now, I want you to think about all of those people and think about being surrounded by those people and having great relationships with those people, having perfect relationships with those people. And now I want you to imagine that the biggest part of those relationships that you have with those people is the way that you come together to honor and glorify God. And if you get that picture in your mind, do you know what you're picturing? You're picturing heaven, is what you're picturing. Because that's what heaven is. Heaven is perfect relationship with God and perfect relationship with each other. And so, in our best friendships here on this earth, we are experiencing just a little taste of what heaven is like. And when we extend our friendship to someone new, we are giving them just a little taste of what heaven is like. And when we go out into our neighborhood and extend a hand of friendship to the people in our neighborhood, we are giving our neighborhood just a little taste of what heaven is like. We live in a culture that undervalues friendship. We are often guilty of undervaluing friendship. But let's not do that anymore. Pray with me.